Turning to the U.S. elections now. However Kamala Harris's presidential candidacy goes, her professional and political journey has already been trailblazing. Her ascendancy marks the growing political clout of Indian Americans in the country and potential divides. A tight race means the Indian American vote matters.
Celebrating India in America. California has among the largest Indian American populations of any state in the country. And commemorating Indian Independence Day is a chance for the community here to come together in music and dance. And to many here, seeing a Californian Indian American potentially become the next president is cause for celebration too.
Kamala Harris, she's one of the best that we have. Why is that? Highly educated, and then she's really delivers on her promise.
Everyone is super excited about her candidacy, and we are super jazzed, and we're going to go vote for her.
Getting Kamala Harris elected is of personal importance to Ajay Bhutoria. He came to the U.S. nearly 30 years ago from India as a student. Today, he's become very active in fundraising for Democratic campaigns. He says he's known the vice president since she was a district attorney in California.
She represents the 4.4 million Indian American. To see that we came from India with 2 suitcases and then made a life for us, and now see to someone who represent our color, our, from the same background and origin, to get elected as the next president of the United States, it's such a matter of pride and joy, and that also brings hopes to millions of kids, that, hey, one day we can also be something.
To Ajay, Kamala Harris represents someone able to understand the issues affecting his community, like the economy and immigration.
So it is important that we have people at the higher level, at the policy making level, where our voices are heard. There are a lot of issues which are important to our community, immigration being one of the most important, where our thousands and thousands of people are stuck in the green card backlog. So someone who could raise the issues. So I thought that I have an opportunity to give a voice to the people who are not involved and bring their issues, as well as also connect the community with the administration and connect the administration with the community, and also build stronger relationships all around.
But Kamala Harris is far from the only Indian American figure that's risen to political prominence on the national stage. The nation has only recently been introduced to Usha Vance, wife of Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy have become surrogates for Donald Trump after their own Republican primary campaigns ended. But Karthick Ramakrishnam, a political scientist studying the 2.2 million strong Indian American voting base, says Indian Americanness is a factor, but it's just one among others.
And to see people like Haley and Ramaswamy do as well as they did is remarkable. That said, most Indian Americans still identify as Democrat, where they stand on issues ranging from the environment to gun control to healthcare is much closer to Kamala Harris than it is to people like Haley and Ramaswamy, right? And so ultimately that's what is going to matter. Of course, having someone who comes from one's community might make a difference in terms of the amount of energy in the base, but party is still more important than shared race or ethnicity.
That cuts both ways. On the other side of the country, Priti Pandya Patel of the South Asian Republican Coalition is trying to get the vote out for the GOP in New Jersey, another state with a high Indian American population.
I mean, it does give me good pride, right, to see somebody that is one of our own that's up there. So yes, of course. But I don't agree with a lot of her views and a lot of her policies and things. And so, of course, there is that always going to be that disconnect. One of the biggest things, I think, is immigration, right? Where she was in charge of, making sure the border was protected, and she really didn't do a good job at that. And now she's coming back saying that I want to do something. I think we should protect the border, and things that she's saying that she should have done or she's going to do, she should have done already because she's vice president.
She organizes roundtables of supporters like this one.
We're having a discussion about how the Indian community has come up, recently. One of the questions that we've proposed as part of the discussion is, with having Kamala Harris Vice President and Usha, do you feel that there's going to be an increase in the voting?
So I see a mixed bag. I see a mixed bag in the sense there are a lot of Trump supporters, but there are also now anti-Trump people who wanted actually Nikki Haley to be the candidate. And then when she didn't get it, this part wanted at least him to get her. And if, in their opinion, if he had gotten Nikki Haley, right now he would be in a very strong situation compared to Kamala Harris.
Amongst your friend circles, how are you thinking that they're going to go out?
The moment Biden dropped out and Kamala became the presidential candidate, assumptive, everyone was excited.
As in every diaspora, the Indian American community is not a monolith. Their motivations and aspirations are nuanced. But it is an increasingly active and growing political force, whether in the halls of power themselves or in the voting booths. In an election that promises to be tight, that force will make itself felt.
Well, Karthick Ramakrishnam is a political scientist and founder of AAPI, a public policy organization partly focused on Asian American issues. You might recognize him from just there in that report. A warm welcome. I would like to first start by picking up on what you said about party being more important than a shared ethnicity. Do you think Kamala Harris will bring Indian Americans out because of her background?
Thank you for having me. So, when it comes to party being more important than ethnicity, it's important to look at the matchup, for example. It wasn't a head-to-head matchup, but in the fall of last year, we asked Asian American voters and Indian American voters in particular their favorability ratings for people like Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy, as well as their favorability ratings for Harris. And you could say that all three of them have Indian origin. And if anything, Haley and Ramaswamy, both sides of their parental heritage comes from India, so maybe they would have had an advantage. What we found instead was that Haley and Ramaswamy did not do well among Indian Americans in terms of their favorability ratings. They had net unfavorable ratings, whereas Harris had a net favorable rating. So that indicates already where the community is at in terms of how they lean. Because they lean more Democratic, Harris was much more likely to have their support, and this was last year. And what we've seen in the last month is even greater enthusiasm for Harris. You see these South Asians for Harris, South Asian women for Harris, South Asian men for Harris. People are just coming out in droves in terms of volunteer energy, and campaign contributions have skyrocketed as well. So where Harris will likely have her greatest impact is among those who are already leaning towards the Democratic Party to ensure higher turnout, but also higher volunteer effort, as well as higher campaign contributions.
Now, polling backs this up that most do identify as Democrats. Why is that? Why not with the Republican Party?
So people might look at the Indian American community and say, you have a population with relatively high education, relatively high incomes. These should be natural constituents for the Republican Party. And in the abstract, that may be true. But there are several factors over the last 2 decades that have made a difference. One, actually the last 3 decades. Bill Clinton, when he was president, he and his administration did a lot of outreach to Indian American voters in the 90s. And then if you look at the 2000s, the 9/11 attacks, the September 11th attacks, meant that many Indian Americans faced racial discrimination or profiling or even discrimination by the government. And the Democratic Party was much better positioned as an anti-discrimination party to attract Indian American voters. Whereas on the Republican side, you saw the rise of nationalism, the rise of Christian conservatism. And given the Indian American population is very religiously diverse, it was really difficult for Indian Americans to find a political home in the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic Party.
Now, just before I let you go, I'm afraid we only have about a minute left, but this is not typically a group that you hear that much about in U.S. politics as a voting bloc, but it does seem to be one that is growing in influence. Can you tell us why that is?
So if you look at the Indian American population compared to other Asian American populations, they're more likely to be spread across the country. So for example, Filipinos and Chinese Americans very heavily concentrated in California, less so for Indian Americans. So they are now the largest Asian American group. They are spread across the country, meaning they're more likely to live in these swing states. And then finally, their voting participation is really high. My research shows that people who come from democratic countries are more likely to participate than those who come from repressive regimes. And so all of these factors, combined with more and more Indian Americans running for office and winning office, all points to this rapid increase of participation in this critical voting group.
Well, thank you so much for joining us to share your insights on the day. That is Karthick Ramakrishnam. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.